What didn't become a big deal is that this guy is minimizing violent fascists. And that's how I feel about this. When you're trying to enforce your own ideology on other people and you have no tolerance for anybody with a differing opinion, particularly journalists, that is fascism. It's so ironic to call yourself an anti-fascist when you're literally enforcing your own particular ideology to the point of violence and you're wearing masks.
Fascism. When hearing the word, one usually thinks of the early 20th century ideology that took power in Italy specifically, but also in Germany and other countries. Yet at the same time, fascist is used loosely and broadly by many as an insult against opponents, intending it to be synonymous with authoritarian, violent, repressive, or just generally undesirable. Hence the historical significance of the word that characterizes and serves as a direct description and further reminder of the horrors of a set ideology and the respective regimes that embodied it is somewhat lost and diluted in the public sphere as a result of this abuse. And although some scholars stress that fascism can be defined, at least not easily, or that it would be difficult for fascist regimes to reappear in the same form in different historical circumstances, a useful thing to do to understand a certain word, we often look up examples in a sentence or context. So in this case, we should take a look at historical examples of fascism, mainly Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, because, like Leon Trotsky said, in order to be capable of foreseeing anything with regard to fascism, it is necessary to have a definition of that idea. What is fascism? What are its base, its form, and its characteristics? How will its development take place? When we isolate and observe them, a pattern emerges where a set of criteria often accompanies every fascist regime. The first is ultranationalism, that one should devote themselves to the nation, which is superior to all others and have a destined right to rule over them, especially them, the eternal enemies of the nation, plotting constantly to bring it down. This narrative is often rationalized by pseudo-scientific biological hierarchy or racial realism that legitimizes xenophobia, racism, and genocide. The second is dictatorship. A cult of personality forms around a charismatic leader, a populist hero and savior, who will guide the nation forward to resurrect a mythic glorious past when the nation was racially pure, culturally homogeneous, patriarchal, and unpolluted by the decadence of modern universal values, egalitarianism, and weakness. Third is conservatism. This is one of the contradictory aspects of fascism that Umberto Eco mentions, the fact that fascism wraps its propaganda in a revolutionary-ish populist tone to appeal to the frustrated masses demanding change, putting socialist or workers' party in the party name, to use the popularity of the left, whilst being simultaneously reactionary in essence, preaching traditionalism, patriarchy, and siding with big capital over the workers. Like Michael Parenti wrote, fascism is a false revolution. It cultivates the appearance of popular politics and a revolutionary aura without offering a genuine revolutionary class content. It propagates a new order while serving the same old moneyed interests. The fourth is militarism. To conquer new territory and achieve its mythic national supremacy, fascism promotes an idea of life as constant warfare, a Darwinian struggle for survival between nations, where weakness, decadence, or degeneracy, which includes liberal democracy, racial impurity, feeble mindedness, and non heterosexuality, all are deterrents to accomplish this mission. Men ought to make good soldiers and husbands, and women should be mothers, give birth, and raise as much offspring as possible, to preserve the demographic superiority of the nation and supply it with enough soldiers in its struggle for domination, exemplified by Mussolini's battle for births, where contraception was banned and discrimination based on the marital status and the number of children was introduced in an effort to raise Italy's population. A historical analysis, however, should place the phenomenon in context to determine the probable causes and circumstances that helped fascism rise and take hold. So we should have a look at the interwar period. The interwar period was marked by the brutal consequences of the Great War, fought between the imperialist powers. Death, destruction, and economic crises increased the anger and dissatisfaction of the lower class, which took to the streets, resulting in violent clashes with the authorities. Another hugely influential event was the successful seizure of power in Russia by the Bolshevik revolutionaries, and with socialism becoming increasingly popular and class struggle intensifying, the large industrialists and landowners, meaning the bourgeoisie, became worried that a similar fate could take place in Germany, Italy, or other countries, and saw in fascism the solution, both against the communist revolution and even the democratic reforms gained by the working class, which couldn't be afforded by the bourgeoisie, not while capitalism was in such a crisis. The close collaboration and support of fascism by big capital is well documented. A few examples include Himmler's circle of friends, composed of German big industrialists, bankers, and politicians, the Industrial Federation in Italy, as well as many other benefactors, funded the fascist campaigns and their paramilitary units. Many German and US companies and their subsidiaries were in business with the Nazis before and during the war, like Standard Oil, Chase Bank, Ford, etc., providing them with fuel, vehicles, ball bearings, and armaments used to kill American soldiers as well, all under the watch of President Roosevelt. While in return the companies were offered Jewish-owned properties, used slave labor, and conducted medical experimentation on the concentration camps' prisoners. The Nazis also privatized multiple state-owned banks and companies, crushed the labor unions and shoved prominent socialists and communists in death camps, rolled back the reforms and regulations, etc. In short, the big capital investment in fascism paid off very handsomely, and the aforementioned companies continued doing business until today. In addition, some of the war criminals who amassed obscene amounts of wealth off the Nazi atrocities, like Alfred Krupp and Friedrich Flick, were pardoned after the Nuremberg trials by the US High Commissioner for Germany, and were also returned all confiscated property. In conclusion, the historic function of fascism is to smash the working class, destroy its organization, and stifle political liberties when the capitalists find themselves unable to govern and dominate with the help of democratic machinery. Back to Joe Rogan, and in light of all the former discussion, it becomes evident that carelessly borrowing the term fascism and stretching it far enough to fit left-wing anti-capitalist groups using a most common, vague criterion inherent to every political rule, like the use of violence against opponents, deprives the word of all meaning, only creates confusion, and is simply wrong. And speaking of ironic, what's truly ironic is how the country whose flag he has visible right behind him would more than qualify for the fascist label if we take his very own criteria of using violence and intolerance toward journalists.